Misconceptions about Metacognitive Therapy, MCT. Welcome back to Metacognitive Therapy Central. My mission is to help you become more psychologically resilient by developing a more relaxed relationship with your thoughts. When people hear about the type of work I do with my clients and helping them reduce overthinking, it seems that a lot of misconceptions exist about the type of therapy that I do, Metacognitive Therapy. So today I would like to give you my perspective on these misconceptions and explain to you how they're not entirely accurate. The first misconception is that MCT teaches you to suppress and control thoughts, which is usually not seen as a good idea, and that I agree with. But this is not entirely what we do. You see, thoughts are kind of like clouds. They come and go whether we want them to be there or not. Similar with thoughts. Thoughts pop up, they stay for some time, and then they go. Trying to chase the clouds is a waste of time and energy. Trying to suppress thoughts is also a waste of time and energy. It's usually not a good strategy, it doesn't work, and it backfires. When I work with my clients, I teach them to do the exact opposite. In fact, I teach them to do absolutely nothing when thoughts pop up. I teach them to take a step back from the thoughts and don't analyze, don't try to suppress, don't try to control, don't try to do anything. And what they experience is that with time, if they don't do anything to the thoughts will become less and less important, and the brain will take care of them on its own. This is something called detached mindfulness, and that is a very different strategy than suppressing thoughts or trying to suppress thoughts, which is usually not a helpful strategy, and it doesn't work in the long term. Misconception number 2 is that worry and rumination are automatic strategies that we have no control over. So before, if someone suffered from depression, their tendency to ruminate was seen as something that just happened to them, that it was a symptom of feeling depressed and not the other way around, that in fact it was the rumination that kept them stay depressed. If someone suffered from anxiety, their worrying was seen as a symptom of having anxiety disorder, and that it was something that just happened and that was out of their control. But according to MCT, it's the other way around. When someone worries for a long time and no longer feels that they can't stop this worry, this is why they develop anxiety disorder and maintain their anxiety. So rumination and worry are active thinking strategies that we do, that we have full control over. So rumination and worry are active and voluntary strategies that we choose to do, and something that we have full control over, although to begin with, it doesn't seem that way. I remember a client I had some time ago who told me that, you know what, with rumination, I kind of feel that I can't stop, but with worrying, it feels like it's happening to me and there's nothing I can do. So we started practicing how we could deal with the thoughts that triggered worry in a different way, to take a step back from them and not suppress them. And she was so surprised coming back a few sessions later how that had made a huge impact on reducing worry. She discovered that she could definitely stop worrying. Because if you think about it, worrying and ruminating is like having a conversation in your mind. And conversations can be stopped. And worry and rumination can definitely be stopped. And this is why the type of therapy that I do, MCT, is so effective, because it targets the worrying and rumination directly. I teach my clients specific strategies to apply instead of worrying, instead of ruminating when unwanted thoughts pop up. And usually they're so surprised coming back a few sessions later that this was such an effective strategy and helped them rediscover how much control they actually had over worry and rumination. The third misconception about MCT is that MCT teaches you to not care about your problems and thereby not solving your problems. This misconception typically comes from people who experience problems in their lives that take up a lot of mental space. Let's imagine if someone has a sick relative that they need to take care of, or someone has children that are being bullied at school, for example. These problems are concrete and they are happening right now. So it makes sense that people want to deal with them and solve them to help change the situation. From that perspective, if someone has learned that worrying about this problem is the same thing as dealing with the problem, it makes sense why they have a hard time letting go of the worrying. They have a hard time letting go of the rumination. But worrying is not the same as solving problems. Worrying is basically just anxious self-talk. You keep going over all these things that you think are problematic, and you keep asking yourself what if questions in your mind. What if this happens? What if this goes wrong? This type of conversation you have with yourself is not the same thing as dealing with the problem and thinking of solutions that you can apply. So how can continuously thinking about the negative aspects of a problem in your life help you solve this problem? Continuously thinking, what if this goes wrong and what if this happens, can't possibly be the same thing as thinking, I need to do this and then I'll implement that and we'll see what happens, and if this doesn't work, then I can do that. Problem solving, which I'm referring to here, is completely different than worrying, which is basically a cyclic negative conversation you keep having with yourself without really getting anywhere. Same thing goes with rumination, which is basically dwelling on all the negative stuff that's happening in your mind and hoping to arrive at a different conclusion. In my experience of working with many clients over the years, is that once my clients reduce the amount of time they spend worrying and dwelling on these actual problems that they have in their lives, they are actually better equipped to deal with these problems. It's kind of like they free up a lot of mental space that they before spent on dwelling of all the things that were not working, and now they can use this mental space to think more creatively and apply solutions faster. So if anything, worrying prevents people from dealing with problems effectively. In fact, studies show that when people worry as a way to come up with solutions to their problems, they are less likely to implement these solutions, and they're less confident in their ability to come up with good solutions. So reducing worry helps people arrive at better conclusions and arrive at better strategies for solving any problems they may have. Imagine someone having problems with connecting with others. Let's say this person feels very lonely, but ends up spending a lot of time ruminating and worrying about how they are unable to connect with others because others don't quite understand them, or others don't have the right intentions of being friends and know this person. Continuing worrying and dwelling on all these negative thoughts and all these negative aspects of this problem does not help this person get up and discover whether they are true or not. However, if this person decides to reduce the amount of time he or she spends ruminating and worrying about the problem, and instead goes out and tries to connect with people, he or she will actually get new information that may disprove all these negative thoughts and all these negative things that they've been thinking about their problem. That maybe people are not as difficult to connect with as they formerly thought, or that not everyone is out to gain something from this person, but actually are genuinely interested in getting to know them. The fourth misconception is that MCT is the same thing as CBT. That Metacognitive Therapy is just another form of cognitive behavioral therapy. Before I learned about MCT, I used to apply CBT to my clients' problems. And I can tell you firsthand how things look different in the therapy room. So the theories behind these two therapy approaches are different. In CBT, the assumption is that having negative thoughts by themselves is what makes people ill. So if someone has thoughts about, I am unlovable, I am not good enough, this is why this person is depressed, because they have this thought. And the goal of CBT is to help this client think differently and get a different perspective on their situation, of the things that they think about themselves, for example. MCT is built on a different theory, of it's not the thoughts themselves that are problematic, but rather how much time people dwell and spend time on thinking about their problems. So in CBT, the content of your thoughts need to change because they're important, they make you ill, versus MCT, the content of your thoughts are not that important, but how you deal with your thoughts and what you think about your thoughts is much more important, and we need to deal with that. So back to the therapy room. When this client came in and they were struggling with the thought of I'm unlovable and they felt very depressed, they have a hard time connecting with others, I would fact check this thought. I would go over this thought and ask them, what is the evidence that you are unlovable? Do you have any evidence against that? Do you have family, friends, co-workers who care about you, who appreciate you, who respect you? What does that say to you? And based on this evidence that you have, what can you think differently about yourself? This would be roughly the CBT approach. In MCT, I ask a completely different set of questions. I ask, do you treat this thought as if it's important to you? Do you treat this thought as if it's an important thought? How do you do that? Do you dwell on this thought? Do you ruminate about this thought? How does that make you feel? Is that something you can stop? If it makes you feel depressed thinking about this thought, can you decide to stop ruminating? Let's teach you how. And because the approaches and the theories behind these approaches are so different, it's not helpful to combine the two. So it's not helpful as a therapist to both apply CBT and MCT to the client because it just ends up confusing people. These are both different strategies and they each have their strengths and weaknesses. The fifth misconception is that MCT doesn't help you deal with deeper rooted issues. If someone has had very negative early life experiences or if they've been experiencing traumatic events, usually they have an idea that they need to deal with these things. They need to unpack and think about and analyze these things that happened in the past to come to terms with them and thereby heal. And from that perspective, MCT seems very simplistic because we're asking people basically to spend less time dwelling on these things that happened in the past, no matter how terrible they were. Because how can dwelling and thinking about something help you overcome that? Maybe, and what if it is the other way around? What if it's all this dwelling and thinking and analysis that is maintaining the problem and preventing your mind from dealing with this thing on its own? Maybe the hurt that you're experiencing from having had all those terrible experiences, maybe the stress and the anxiety and the depression that you keep struggling with is caused by constantly dwelling and going back to thinking about this problem, whether this is done by yourself or in therapy. You can think about it as having a wound. The best thing you can do if you have a flesh wound is just to leave it alone and let the body heal it on its own. If you continue scratching, if you go back and scratch a lot, you naturally prolong this healing process. So having had difficult and even traumatic life experiences can be very painful, but continuously dwelling on them, continuously trying to unpack them, understand them, and deal with them is kind of like going back and keep scratching the wound. You're actually preventing the mind from taking care of all these memories of all these hurt and stress and anxiety and depression. So according to this MCT approach, the best way and the fastest way to heal from upsetting life experiences and traumatic life experiences is actually by thinking less about them and thereby not keeping them alive in your mind. So the real misconception is that gaining insight into what happened, understanding things by thinking about them will help me overcome them. But that is not true. Gaining insight is just gaining insight. Gaining insight is not the same thing as being able to move on. Now, some people are able to do that. And a big portion of my clients have been to psychoanalytic therapy and been dwelling and analyzing all these things for years and years. Some people really do appreciate the insight that they've gotten. It's great for them to understand what happened and from there a lot of people are actually able to move on and let it go. But the problem is that if you no longer believe that you can stop dwelling on all these past experiences, if you cannot move on from them mentally, then you're bound to continue to ruminate about them, to continue to dwell on them, and thereby continue maintaining this feeling of hurt and upset and stress and trauma, unfortunately. On top of that, some clients even experience that having gained all this insight by thinking so much about all these past experiences actually just gives them more stuff to ruminate about. And that feels incredibly confusing. So ultimately, it depends on which approach you believe is helpful to remove from past hurt and traumatic experiences. According to MCT, the fastest and most effective way is to stop dwelling so much, to stop scratching so much, let the mental wound heal on its own. That's the faster and less hurtful way. Could you relate to any of these misconceptions, and have you come across any other misconceptions than the ones I mentioned here? Feel free to write them in the comments below. I'll get back to them at some point and perhaps create a new video about them. Thanks so much for watching.